You need to understand something essential here, because this moment is often completely misunderstood. When someone with avoidant tendencies begins to withdraw, just as the connection starts feeling real, it's easy to label it as lack of interest, rejection, or even intentional manipulation. But that surface interpretation misses what is actually happening underneath. What you're seeing is not emotional emptiness. It is fear being activated. Surface-level connection feels manageable for them because it doesn't require emotional exposure or challenge their independence. It allows closeness without vulnerability. However, when the bond starts to deepen and the interaction becomes more meaningful, something inside them shifts. The possibility of being emotionally seen and truly known begins to feel intense, and that intensity is what triggers their protective response, rather than any absence of feeling. This is where their behavior starts to change in ways that can feel confusing from the outside. They may become slower in communication, less emotionally expressive, or noticeably more distant. They might redirect their attention elsewhere or start rationalizing why the connection feels uncertain. In some cases, they even begin to find flaws in the relationship or in you, not because those flaws suddenly appeared, but because their system is trying to create emotional distance. These reactions are not random or careless. They are protective mechanisms designed to reduce internal discomfort. The closer the emotional bond becomes, the more their nervous system perceives pressure, and in response, they instinctively create space to regain a sense of control and safety. From the outside, this can look contradictory and emotionally destabilizing. Someone who was recently open and engaged can suddenly seem unavailable or detached, which often leads to confusion and self-doubt. But if you interpret this only emotionally, you may end up chasing clarity, over-explaining yourself, or trying harder to prove your value. Unfortunately, those responses often intensify the cycle, because increased pressure can reinforce their need to withdraw further. The key shift is understanding that their distance is not a reflection of your worth or the significance of the connection. In many cases, it is actually a sign that the connection mattered enough to activate their defense system. Seeing this correctly allows you to respond with more awareness instead of emotional reaction. On a deeper level, people are not drawn away from what feels meaningless to them. They are drawn away from what feels meaningful but also emotionally overwhelming. For someone with avoidant patterns, closeness becomes linked with both desire and threat at the same time. They want connection, but they also associate it with loss of independence, emotional exposure, or past experiences of being hurt. So, when intimacy increases, two opposing forces begin to operate inside them simultaneously. One part wants to move closer, while another part pushes away to prevent vulnerability. This internal conflict creates the back-and-forth behavior that feels so inconsistent, even though it is driven by a very real psychological struggle rather than manipulation or lack of care. Because of this internal push and pull, their behavior naturally oscillates. They may lean in when they feel emotionally safe, then pull back when that same closeness begins to feel overwhelming. This is not a calculated decision, but an automatic nervous system response shaped by past conditioning. Understanding this helps you stop interpreting every shift as a definitive statement about the relationship. Instead, you begin to recognize it as emotional regulation in progress, not emotional rejection. When you see it this way, your focus shifts from trying to fix or chase consistency in them to maintaining clarity within yourself, which prevents you from getting pulled into reactive patterns that often escalate the distance even further. At its core, this dynamic is not only about their fear, but also about your perception of it. If you respond to their withdrawal as rejection, you will naturally move into behaviors like chasing, overthinking, or seeking reassurance, which can intensify their discomfort. But if you understand it as a fear response, you are less likely to take it personally or lose your internal balance. This awareness creates emotional stability on your side, even when their behavior feels uncertain. The real turning point happens when you stop searching for answers through their actions and start observing the pattern with clarity. In doing so, you step out of the cycle of confusion and begin responding from grounded awareness rather than emotional reactivity, which ultimately protects your sense of self. When someone is consistent, your nervous system naturally settles. There's clarity, and with clarity comes calm. You don't spend your energy decoding every interaction or questioning where you stand. But inconsistency does the opposite. It pulls you into a loop of analysis. You start replaying conversations, searching for meaning, wondering what shifted and why. Slowly, without noticing it, your attention becomes fixated on the person because uncertainty is psychologically sticky. It keeps your mind engaged, not because the connection is stable, but because it is unresolved. And that unresolved feeling creates attachment through anticipation. You begin holding on to the version of them that showed up during the good moments, waiting for it to return, because you've already experienced emotional reward in between the instability.
This is exactly why mixed signals feel so powerful. They don't give you enough consistency to feel secure, but they give you just enough connection to stay emotionally invested. The important distinction here is understanding what is actually happening beneath the surface. This is not a stable person expressing unstable interest. It's an internally conflicted person experiencing both desire and fear at the same time. And when you respond emotionally to that imbalance, when you chase clarity, overinvest, or try harder to stabilize the connection, you unintentionally reinforce the cycle. Your increased effort reduces their internal pressure to resolve their own inconsistency, and the dynamic continues. What's required instead is awareness. Mixed signals are not meant to be decoded endlessly. They are meant to be understood as information about internal alignment.
At a deeper level, inconsistency is telling you something very specific. This person is not internally integrated. And when someone lacks internal alignment, they cannot provide external consistency, no matter how strong the emotional moments between you may feel. That doesn't make them a bad person. It simply reflects their current capacity. The shift happens when you stop treating consistency as something you can earn through patience, effort, or emotional investment. Consistency is not negotiated into existence. It is observed. It either exists or it doesn't. And mixed signals only hold emotional power when you unconsciously trade your need for stability in exchange for emotional highs. That's where confusion takes root, when intensity is mistaken for reliability.
The real turning point is when you begin to ask a different question.
Instead of reacting to who they are in their best moments, you start evaluating who they are consistently. Those are not the same relationship. One is built on emotional peaks, the other on patterns. Once you see that difference clearly, your emotional engagement begins to shift. You stop being pulled into the rhythm of inconsistency and start observing it from a more grounded perspective. Instead of asking why they behave this way, you begin asking what you are willing to accept. That shift moves you out of confusion and into clarity, because the problem is no longer their mixed signals. It becomes your tolerance for them.
As you go deeper into this pattern, another layer becomes visible: emotional avoidance.
It's not just inconsistency in behavior, but resistance to depth itself. You'll notice that when conversations begin to move into emotionally meaningful territory, feelings, needs, expectations, future intentions, the energy often changes. The responses may become shorter, more intellectual, or emotionally diluted. Sometimes there's humor to deflect, sometimes a topic change, and sometimes complete withdrawal. On the surface, it can feel like disinterest, but psychologically it's more about emotional exposure feeling unsafe than a lack of care.
Many people with avoidant tendencies are not disconnected from emotion.
They often feel deeply, but have learned to process everything internally. Over time, self-reliance becomes their emotional identity. "I handle things on my own" becomes a core operating system. So when a relationship begins to require shared emotional expression, it challenges that system. It requires vulnerability, articulation, and surrendering control over how they are perceived. And if past experiences have linked vulnerability with rejection, criticism, or emotional loss of control, their instinct will always be to retreat from that space. Depth, for them, is not simply uncomfortable, it feels unsafe. This creates a very real gap in connection. Because intimacy is not built on shared time or surface-level closeness, it is built on emotional accessibility. The ability to express inner experience and have it received without defense is what creates true relational depth. Without that exchange, the connection may feel good in moments, but it remains structurally limited. And in response to this gap, many people try to compensate by pushing for more communication, asking deeper questions, or trying to create the right environment for openness. But the fundamental misunderstanding is thinking that emotional depth can be drawn out through effort alone. You cannot extract emotional availability from someone who has not developed it internally. It is not something you can create for them. It is something they must learn to tolerate within themselves. The shift, therefore, is not about trying harder to reach them. It's about seeing clearly where they currently are. Their avoidance of emotional depth is not a reflection of your value or the significance of the connection. It reflects their capacity. And when you stop personalizing that limitation, you stop interpreting silence as rejection and start recognizing it as structure. From that clarity comes a more grounded question. Instead of asking how to make them open up, you begin asking whether they are actually capable and willing to meet you at the level of depth you require. Because relationships do not evolve beyond the emotional honesty both people are willing to participate in. They plateau where avoidance begins. And when you finally understand that, your focus shifts back to yourself. You stop chasing conversations that never fully arrive, and you start choosing dynamics where emotional presence is mutual, not conditional. You stop putting your energy into potential that isn't actually being lived out. And instead, you begin orienting yourself towards something more stable, more mutual, and more emotionally grounded. Because at its core, love is not just about what you feel internally for someone. It's about whether that feeling can be expressed, received, and sustained in a shared space over time. And when someone cannot consistently meet you there, then no matter how powerful the connection feels in isolated moments, it will never fully mature into a relationship that can hold itself together. Connection without emotional depth is simply proximity, and eventually you have to ask yourself whether closeness without real emotional presence is enough for you to stay invested. As you start to recognize their discomfort with emotional depth, a more confusing pattern begins to emerge. It's not just that they avoid intimacy altogether, it's that they often pull away right after moments that actually feel meaningful. You share something real, they respond with presence, and for a brief window, it feels like something shifts into a more secure direction. There's openness, engagement, even emotional closeness that feels significant. But then, almost suddenly, the energy changes. They become quieter, less available, more detached, as if the very moment of closeness triggered something that required them to retreat. From an emotional perspective, this feels like rejection or inconsistency. It can even make you question whether the connection you felt was ever real. But psychologically, the pattern tells a very different story. For someone with avoidant tendencies, intimacy does not only create connection, it activates internal threat responses. Moments of closeness, especially meaningful ones, signal emotional exposure, vulnerability, and the possibility of dependency. And if someone has learned, through experience or conditioning, that dependency leads to loss, overwhelm, or emotional pain, then those signals automatically trigger a protective response. This is not a deliberate choice they are making in the moment. It is a regulation process happening beneath awareness. The nervous system reaches a point where closeness feels like too much, and the only way to restore a sense of control is to create distance. That distance might look like silence, reduced communication, or emotional withdrawal, but its function is the same: to return to a state that feels safe and manageable. This is why the pattern feels so contradictory from the outside. What feels like progress in the connection often becomes the very thing that precedes withdrawal. And if you don't understand this mechanism, you begin to personalize it. You start analyzing what you said, what changed, or what went wrong in that moment of closeness. But the truth is, nothing necessarily broke. The intimacy itself was the trigger. Closeness creates activation, and activation creates distance. Once you see that pattern clearly, you stop misinterpreting their withdrawal as a reflection of the connection's value and start recognizing it as a response to its intensity. The challenge comes in how naturally people respond to this cycle. When distance appears after intimacy, the instinct is often to close the gap immediately, to reach out, reassure, or try to recreate the emotional closeness that just existed. But this is where the cycle deepens. Because while you are moving toward reconnection, they are simultaneously trying to restore emotional space. Your pursuit, even if rooted in care, can feel like pressure to a system that is already overwhelmed. And pressure, in that state, doesn't create safety, it intensifies withdrawal. So instead of resolving the cycle, both sides unintentionally reinforce it. What changes everything is awareness. When you understand that their withdrawal is not a verdict on your worth or the validity of what you shared, but a reaction to emotional intensity, you stop reacting impulsively. You stop trying to fix the distance as soon as it appears. You begin to allow space without losing your internal clarity. You recognize that for them, intimacy is not just something they experience, it is something they have to recover from. And that realization shifts your entire way of engaging. It moves you from reaction into observation, from emotional urgency into grounded awareness. This does not mean accepting inconsistency as something you must tolerate indefinitely. It means no longer misreading it. Because when you stop taking responsibility for a pattern that originates within someone else's emotional system, you regain your ability to make clearer decisions. A healthy relationship is not defined by occasional moments of closeness, but by the capacity to sustain that closeness without fear continuously interrupting it. If every moment of connection is followed by emotional retreat, then the relationship is not deepening, it is cycling. It rises, it collapses, and it resets, without ever stabilizing into something secure. And over time, that cycle becomes emotionally draining, because you are not building from intimacy, you are constantly recovering from its disappearance. Real connection is not defined by how deeply you can connect in isolated moments, but by how consistently that connection can exist without disruption. If presence cannot be maintained, then what you are experiencing is not a stable bond, but intermittent access to emotional closeness. And at some point, the most important shift is no longer about understanding why they move this way, but about evaluating what this pattern costs you. As you begin to see these cycles more clearly, another layer becomes undeniable. Even when there are genuine moments of care, warmth, or emotional engagement, there is still often a distance that remains. It can feel like you are close but never fully close, understood but not fully seen, connected but not fully known. And that almost but not quite feeling is often more confusing than outright distance.
It creates the sense that something deeper is always just out of reach.
From the surface, this can look like uncertainty about the relationship. But psychologically, it is not confusion, it is protection. Fully letting someone in requires emotional exposure that goes beyond comfort. It requires revealing fears, wounds, insecurities, and internal truths that are not easily shared. It requires being seen without control over how that visibility is received. And for someone with avoidant patterns, that level of exposure is associated with risk, not safety. Not necessarily because of who you are, but because of what vulnerability has represented in their past. At some point, they learned that being fully known can lead to emotional consequences they were not equipped to handle. So instead of risking that level of exposure again, they adapt by compartmentalizing what they share, keeping parts of themselves internally contained and maintaining a controlled distance even in moments of closeness. And that is where the deeper limitation becomes visible, not in their ability to feel, but in their ability to fully remain seen while feeling it. They tend to show you the parts of themselves that